What we really want AI to do is to help us alongside where we're working. It was really the insight that drove Grammarly. I don't need to go ask, did I write this well? Could I have done better? It's right next to you. We decrease the distance between the person with the insight and the work product. It's going to decrease the distance between the ingenuity and the impact.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode, in-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption, the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
Hi, I'm Shishir Mehrotra.
Okay, listeners, today we are being joined by a remarkable guest. Shishir has had an incredible tech leadership career. After a number of years at Microsoft, Shishir moved to YouTube, where he served as combined Chief Product Officer and Chief Technology Officer during its most pivotal period of growth. He then went on to found Coda, a modern information management tool, and led it through to its recent 10-figure acquisition by Grammarly. Of all the senior leaders I came across in my 10 years at Google, Shishir was one of only two who was universally both liked and respected. And it's no coincidence that the other such leader, Oliver Heckman, who we've had on the pod before, eventually followed Shishir to Coda, where he served as their CTO. It is also no coincidence that Grammarly took the unusual step of appointing Shishir as CEO of the combined entity post-acquisition. When the deal was announced, Shishir wrote a post explaining his vision for AI-native productivity, a topic that is incredibly relevant to every founder out there. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Shishir, welcome to the Startup Podcast.
Thanks for having me. And what a positive intro. I was wondering who the number two was. It's a great shout out for Oliver as well.
Got to give him a shout out. He's a great manager, a great leader. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. Let's set the scene a little bit and talk about the vision. You know, in your blog post, you kind of teased it a little bit, that you have a vision of AI native productivity and how that vision developed during your time at Coda and how it evolved through to that merger with Grammarly.
You know, our journey with Coda has been awesome. I mean, we've gotten a chance to be right at the forefront of redefining how people think about productivity. It's for someone like me, it's a dream product to work on. You really get to, we say, change the default blinking cursor of millions of people. So it's very fun and fulfilling. A couple of years ago, we had this realization, like many others, that AI was changing everything about how our surfaces operate and how our productivity works, how teams are going to work, how individuals are going to work. And we started doing a number of different projects in that space. One of the core things we started working on, we started integrating AI more closely into our surface. But the thing that Coda uniquely did well relative to AI was we had a set of very deep integrations with other products. We call those packs. It's a very popular feature of Coda. There's thousands of packs out there. There's about 800 or so that are public in the gallery. You can connect Coda to anything. So you can connect Coda to Jira or Salesforce or so on. It's popular. It's like 30% of Coda docs use a pack of some form. And I think last year, something like 4 billion actions taken through these packs, connecting documents to different systems. That became really the basis of how we started thinking about Coda's role in AI, this ability to connect a flexible productivity surface with all of your other applications. About a year ago, we started working on a product we call Coda Brain, where we pulled that feature out of Coda and turned it into a conversational chatbot. I always describe it to the team as we went from a very declarative way to work with other systems to a conversational way to work with systems. And that was growing, quite popular. And then this moment happened. So a few months back, I was headed down a particular path of what we were going to do next year. I had written our memo. I was running it by the board and my advisors. And one of them, Hemant Taneja, who close friend and one of the earliest investors in Coda, he heard it and he said, you should really go talk to the founders of Grammarly. And my first instinct was, I'm not totally sure why. I've got my plan. It's, what do you have in mind? And he said, just take the meeting. You'll enjoy it. And so I flew up to Vancouver, spent the day with Max and Alex, the co-founders of Grammarly. And it was honestly one of the most fun and interesting product discussion days I've had ever. It was just enormously fun. Basically, what we did was we went through each of our vision memos. And what we found was they felt like puzzle pieces. They felt like they were sort of, connected together in this unexpected, but really amazing way. And so if you think about Grammarly, we started talking about this term of AI agents. Like, what is an agent? And one of the observations that the Grammarly team had is that Grammarly is a sort of the original agent. It works across, it follows you into every application you work in and helps millions of people with communication. It's very broadly used. It's about 40 million daily active users. A lot of people use Grammarly every single day. And the core technology that enables that is this integration with all those applications. About 500,000 applications support Grammarly as an agent working on their surface. And Max and Alex had this analogy. They said, it's like we built this AI superhighway that takes AI right to the edge, right to where everybody already works. And we're only running one car on that highway. We're running this amazing proofreader. Imagine if we could run all sorts of things through that highway. And they started talking about how they wanted to build these set of agents that would connect to different knowledge sets or to different systems. And they basically started describing what at Coda we call packs. And we said, actually, we have a pretty good way to do that already. We have thousands of them. There's a vibrant ecosystem that builds them. Maybe we could partner together and give people this sort of magical experience where you can work anywhere. You can be working in a Google Doc, you can be working in Salesforce, you can be working in Slack. And now, instead of just having this agent that can help you correct your language, you might be, for example, writing a memo for a customer and you say, these set of agents can come help correct you got the grammar wrong in this place, but can also say, here's some feedback the customer gave last time, or here's some information that came from the last meeting, or here's some more information about the feature you're about to tell them about, and really help you with your journey. So that was one big observation. And then the other big observation was about the future of applications. I think the interesting thing about applications is I think applications are going through their own transformation. And the Grammarly team had been thinking a lot about this too. Grammarly is an interesting product where it works everywhere, but it actually doesn't have a commonly used central home. It doesn't have that destination where you really start. And so they were working on building up an AI native editor. And as we started looking at what they were building, it looked a lot like Coda. And, we talked a lot about that journey, and editors are deceptive because they look simple. We take them for granted. They look like we're so used to them that we take all the feature set of an editor for granted, but it's actually quite hard to build a good document. And so we started talking about that and realized that we shared this ambition to not only have agents that work everywhere, but to change the core blinking cursor of what people write with, and decided that would be interesting to do together. And moreover, I think anybody that uses Coda closely, and I think you guys do as well.
We run the podcast on Coda.
You run the podcast on Coda. So one of the things people don't realize is that Coda is actually an application builder hiding in a document skin. My favorite line from our users is, you can build docs as powerful as apps. And so we started talking about this idea of building AI applications and say, what would it feel like if you think about the history of applications? Early on applications were about digitizing, the typewriters and the professor slides and so on. And then they became about collaboration with humans. And we had products like Google Docs and products like Slack. And then now I think we have this idea that applications themselves act like humans. And they are full of these agents that are working right alongside you and finishing your sentences and filling in your data and taking actions on your behalf. And what if we build the platform for the next generation of AI applications? So these two things that became the core of how we wanted to think about it: AI agents and AI applications. We had a super fun time talking about it. By the end of the day, we said, it'd be way, way more fun to do this together than apart. And, it was actually a fairly fast deal. We decided very quickly, in the course of the next few days, nailed down all the terms. And somewhere in that process, they asked me how would I like to be the CEO of the joint company, which I was also excited to do. And as mentioned before we started, that it kind of feels like founding a new joint company, which I think is a lot of fun as well.
That's fantastic. And, I love these stories that come out of Silicon Valley of gigantic companies that just kind of decide to merge over a great session, a great discussion. And it's a much better reason than most M&A happens, on this sort of balance sheet basis. You've got a shared vision and, like you said, two pieces of a puzzle fitting together. So if I were to paraphrase a bit of what you're saying, maybe like the underlying vision, I think one of the things, like you said, that kind of sets Coda and Grammarly apart from a lot of other folks coming from opposite directions nearly, is this ability to integrate with all the sources of data. AI fundamentally is only as good as the data that you feed it. And so am I correct in understanding that kind of that substrate of your vision is to have an effective AI productivity helper, it needs to have access to all of the relevant data wherever it happens to be?
Yes, and I actually think it's a little confusing because for people that are learning about the role of data in AI, data plays multiple roles in AI. And so, people will talk a lot about AI is only as useful as the data, and data is used in two very different ways as we think about AI. This obviously data is used for training, and you bring in data, and the big insight behind transformers and what we're seeing with large language models is that we discovered that we can actually train these AI systems by having them read data and do this, like what seemed like a small trick of predict the next word turned into an enormously powerful primitive. And so you can basically get this agent that knows and that has read everything in the world, has read the entire internet. It's like ChatGPT has. So that's one way that data gets used. It gets used for training. The problem is that now when you want that agent to understand something about you, it's a very different set of data. And in particular, just to give you a motivating example, this is particularly hard inside teams. So imagine you come to that agent and you can ask any question in the world. And we've all gotten used to this. You can come in and say, tell me the history of how the Eiffel Tower was built, and it'll do a great job of telling you everything about it. Or write me a great essay about it. It'll do a great job. Write me a poem or write me a rap, it'll so on. But if you come and you say, who is getting promoted next week? You want some people to get one answer and you want other people to get a different answer. And that turns out to be a really hard problem. And up till now, the solutions to that problem have all happened post-training. The main solution for it is something that people called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. It's a really fancy word for turn that problem into a search problem and then a AI generation problem. To do that well, you have to have not only access to all the information that a user has access to and a company has access to, but you have to understand what all the permissions are and who has access to what. And then you can go and respond to questions with that data. So the heart of why what at Coda we call PACs and what we're now referring to as the next set of agents, the heart of why they're impactful is because they're built to understand your information in a way that can make it accessible to your AI system. And that just turns out to be really powerful, really hard to do. And, so the Coda team had just built honestly, a little bit unexpectedly, because it wasn't built for that purpose, had found ourselves in the state of, we have all these pretty good integrations with all these different systems, and that becomes the basis of where AI is headed. And so I think that's, it is a unique observation that led to this.
I think that's really fascinating. And it kind of leads me to my next question or sort of thing to discuss, which is, I think a lot of founders are actually feeling a little bit anxious in this moment. And not just founders, I think a lot of folks working in the industry. And that's because you hear, AI is changing everything. If you are not using AI to massively increase your productivity, you're being left behind. And people are like, well, maybe I'm left behind. Maybe I'm being left behind. Sometimes I feel that way. And so I guess there's sort of two questions. Like one, I suppose, is more theoretical and sort of applies to what you're doing at Coda. And then I'd love to have a bit more of a practical discussion. But the theoretical one is there are a lot of tools that superficially look like Coda brain, right? You've got anyone can make a chatbot and say, this is a productivity chatbot and integrates into Google Docs or it integrates into this or that. And, the problem with evaluating any LLM or any sort of chat interface is it's really about, it sort of takes me back to my Google days and, doing evaluations of different ranking and so on. It's about the quality of the answers and the consistency of the answers over time. And in order to really get that productivity boost, you need to be able to cross that uncanny valley into being able to really trust that chatbot to give you answers that help you be more productive. And so I guess the theoretical question is, how do you actually measure that? How can you tell when you've crossed that chasm and where you have a truly useful tool?
Okay, lots to react to there. So first off, I'd say there's definitely this challenge of How do you get a great answer? How do you chat with an assistant and get back great answers? I will say that I view that problem as actually a sort of speed bump problem onto the real problem, which is how do I get an assistant that can work alongside me where I actually work? And I actually think chat is an experience. I think the idea of being conversational with a system is it's magical. It's right out of science fiction, but actually it's not practically what you want to do. So most of the time, I think what you actually want is something that is invisibly working alongside you and ending up helping you do better in a way that maybe we'll take more for granted, but is actually significantly more useful. So I can sort of break those apart for a minute, but they cause different challenges. So I think, as we measure Coda Brain, for example, you're right, it's really hard because the parts of that pipeline that you can measure very clearly. So, if you think about a RAG system, a retrieval augmented generation system, retrieval is it's a pretty good and relatively easy to measure step. Did you get the right information? And it's hard to do. And you have to worry about permissions. You have to worry about what we call popularity. So you want to know of the different sources for this particular information, which is the most important. Google got famous to doing relevance well, but doing that inside a company turns out to be much harder. It's a lot less. In some senses, there's a lot more signals. In some senses, there's a lot less signals. A lot less traditional signals. You don't get this sort of page rank model that you can just use for that. Recency really matters. Sometimes people write stuff that is the exact opposite of what the actual answer is because they're writing the counterfactual, so on. So retrieval is very hard. And then the generation step is tricky because the test is very human-like. And so there isn't a sort of factual test of like, was that the right answer or not? And it's particularly hard. You'll probably get this analogy. So if you just want to have empathy for how hard a quality problem this is, one way to think about it is, I remember when YouTube moved from using our own search index to using the Google search index. It's called OneTree. And at the time, we went and I started learning more about how Google judged quality. And we realized that the way Google actually judges quality, this is probably a big surprise to people, very qualitatively. So the key technique is called side-by-sides. So you run lots and lots of queries. You say, here's one version of results, here's another version of results, and you get a set of raters to look at that, and you say, that's better. And they say, okay, we're launching that version. And Google has basically been, iterating and polishing that for years and years and years and years and getting better. So we came along with YouTube and we said, we should do the same thing. But it turned out it was very hard to do with YouTube because YouTube was heavily personalized. And so what it meant was actually the most popular query on YouTube almost every day is funny video. That's what people want. And obviously what is funny to you is not necessarily what's funny to me, and not the same thing that's funny to, my friend in India or my friend in Australia or my friend in France or so on. And so now side-by-sides are really hard because you had to say, you couldn't objectively say this one is better than this one. So I view that as it was 10x harder. Everything, you had to look at a lot of other signals. You looked at a lot of passive signals of what did people do next. It was harder to objectively judge and say, no, that's the funniest video, and therefore that is the correct answer. Whereas Google could have a view of that is the correct answer. If I think about what we're doing now with the quality of AI in these chat experiences, especially in the RAG context, in context where you're using different data for people, it's even like 10x harder. So if you think about it, it's like one step is harder because the person is different, but you're running on the same data. Like YouTube has all the same data for everybody, all the same videos for everybody. The people are different. But in this world, the people are different and the data is different. So when I come in and I say, who's getting promoted next week, not only do I have to simulate me as a different person, it is simulate a completely different data set that is very hard for anybody to wrap their head around. Was that the best answer from the data set? So I would say that, that set of techniques, as you think about quality, has shifted. And it shifts from being a lot of fairly objective techniques where you can do side-by-sides and say that is good and that is bad, to a lot of qualitative techniques that require a feedback loop back through the system. So you do a lot of ask people to rate their responses. You do a lot of re-question rates. Like all of those things are what you look for because it's hard to get to the right truth. The other thing I was going to say is, I think this problem with judging chat it's an interesting problem. And as a researchy problem, it's really interesting. I don't think it's actually the problem that is going to be most important for how AI ends up being used in the workplace, because I think the experience of going to a chat bot and getting a response is actually this will quickly become the severe minority case of how AI helps us in work. And the reason for that is what we really want AI to do is to help us alongside where we're working. And it was really the insight that drove Grammarly, was that you show up right in your space. I don't need to go ask, did I write this well? Could I have done better? It's right next to you.
So it's nearly like, Shishir, it's I know you started your career at Microsoft. This is nearly like Clippy finally enabled by the data and technology that is needed to make it effective.
So I think Clippy, I would argue Clippy, like if we follow this analogy through. So the assistant is, every time I want to do work, I walk outside my office, I ask a person, and then I walk back. Right? And that was my conjecture is that that's an infrequent thing that will happen. Clippy was same idea, but that person keeps barging into my office and telling me what to do. Not really with a purposeful view, but just a, hey, I'm here. Can I help you with something now? And I do think that's interesting, but not really quite what I have in mind. So what I have in mind is AI that feels a lot more like working with humans. And so to give you a different example, I'm sure you said something earlier of you have a great video editor that helps you with the podcast.
Hi, Justin.
There we go. So that's a person, right? That's it. And the way I think you think about it is like your expectations of that person is that you can hand this to them with very loose instructions. They know a great tool set and they can work alongside you to make a great product. And I think that the way, one of the biggest insights of Grammarly was the difference between push and pull. The idea of I come right in, I work alongside you. We've all written something and said, hey, can you read this for me? Hey, can you just make sure I got this right? That idea, I'm going to work right alongside you just like a human would. One like really simple visual for it is when you use Coda or use Google Docs or so on, there's a set of avatars at the top. These are the people working with you. Imagine those weren't just people. Imagine if those were also AI agents and they can do all the same things that those people can do. You can ask them questions, you can direct their work, and you can say, here's what I want you to do with me. Now you have something where it really works on that task in a way that you can train, you can adjust their behavior. And I do think that's fundamentally different than the Clippy vision of the world. And for that, I think measuring quality and so on is, in some senses, harder, in some senses easier. Those have much more fixed tasks. It's easier to give your video editor feedback on this worked well or it didn't. And so I think the idea of some random person keeps walking into our podcast and say, hey, can I help you edit your video? I don't think that'd really be that useful to you. So I think of these as like, you're going to hire these agents, you're going to pick ones that are good for your job, and you're going to expect them to work on tasks like you would have worked with humans.
Now, that makes a lot of sense. Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. So to get really practical for a moment, Shishir, like if we talk about the current state of the art in AI-assisted productivity, in your view, what are the workflows that you are finding are currently the most accelerated by AI? Where's the low-hanging fruit here?
I'll answer sort of narrowly and incredibly broadly. And just an observation of, and we look at how AI is used in Coda, for example. It's one. A lot of people will use this. They use this word, the assistant, right? They'll say AI acts like an assistant for me, and it's one of my observations that I remember when I first got an executive assistant, and I hired this person, and for about a year I was significantly less productive. It was like very hard to know what job to give this person. Describing the job required all this work. And then gradually sort of fill into a pattern of here's a set of things this person can do. And they can do it in a way that they can find their path through doing it better and better over time. It's repetitive enough that we can learn together, but it's not so repetitive that I can, completely automate it away. I need something that feels human-like to do it. And so, for that world, scheduling became a very common task that you sort of develop this pattern. I would say in today's AI world, the equivalent of that is summarization. I think that task has shown up everywhere. It's the most common use of AI in Coda is get things like meeting recordings, meeting notes, emails, what's happening in Salesforce, so on, and give me a summary. So and it's a task that this generation of AI is incredibly good at. I think that as I look forward, and that's why we see it. We see it in a lot of different tools are doing different versions of that. When we think about low-hanging fruit from there, I think we have I mean, there are things we can do everywhere. And then, so my broader version of this would be, there are very few things that I can imagine where, we can assign it to a person, or we're not soon going to be able to assign it to an agent. And I think the really interesting ones are ones that take action in the world. So I'll give you, for example, one of my favorite AI workflows is I have a set of workflows that I think in old terms we would have called mail merge. They're sending out emails that look kind of similar to lots of people, but with enough difference that, me writing them and so on would have taken forever. And I think that idea of like, hey, I'm going to be in New York next week. Can you find the 30 people I met with last time I was there? Email them that I'm going to be there. And for each one, include something about what we last communicated about. For each one, give some information on what I'd like to talk about. Give me a chance to review it. Send them all out. And I think that idea of, I can start directing actions in the real world. I think that's when we see a completely different level of productivity unlocked.
So do you feel like that's something that is possible today, or that's sort of the near-term horizon? Like for your upcoming trip, are you actually using an AI tool to do what you just described?
Yeah, so I use Coda for doing all those tools. Okay. I would say it is possible today. I don't think that the process of stitching agents together is as approachable as I would like yet. So we have a lot of work to do on it, but it's absolutely possible today. The use case I described is exactly what I'm doing. I think it's very doable, but I think it comes back to this idea of, when we think about working with an assistant where you get a new employee, it takes a little while to learn what can this thing do that I trusted to do on autopilot or on semi-autopilot. I mean, I said something really important there that could easily get lost as well. If you hired a new employee and you said, hey, can you send emails to customers for me? At least the first few times, you'd say, bring them to me before you send them.
Yes.
Let me take a look. And you'd want a system where even if they didn't bring it to you before they send them, after that, you would say, go ahead and send them, but make sure I can see them after. And I'll come and tell you, oh, you screwed this one up, or you should have done this one differently. And eventually you stop looking at them. But I think that idea of we're gonna pick tasks where there's some level of repeatability to them, so it's worth the investment to teach this assistant to do it. There's some sort of visibility, so you can get some trust in what's happening and some auditability, and then you feel more comfortable. And that goes back to quality. When you said, how do you judge quality? And I think we've been looking at it with chatbots, but actually the way you judge quality of these things is the same way you judge quality of employees.
We actually talked a couple of weeks ago about like, how do you decide which general purpose foundation LLM to use? Oh, do I use, 4.0 or do I use Claude or whatever? And I said, it's really becoming more like a job interview where it's like the way you find out which chatbot to use is by going through a series of scenarios and judging the quality kind of subjectively to yourself, because there's no clue in the interface. There's no way for them to communicate to you, which one is right to you. You've reached a level of complexity where you kind of have to interrogate that black box yourself.
And the interesting thing about it is, to stretch that analogy one step further, it's almost like you can interview these multiple candidates, but what you can actually do is take them, and like what I think of what people do with prompts is you can kind of train them a little bit, and then you can interview them again. And you can say, I'm going to train all of you, and at some point I'm going to decide, okay, you do this job better. And I think it's really interesting the way we think about it. I think there's a lot of analogies to how we interact with humans that are going to be present in this AI future.
I completely agree. You used to be able to judge something by its feature set, by its interface. That's just no longer the case.
Yeah, it's not static. You can change it.
But it's opaque, right? You don't really know what's happening under the hood.
That's true.
The only thing you can do is put inputs in and evaluate the outputs. But to return to your analogy of an assistant, because, for those who have been fortunate to have assistants, they can be so valuable. And one of the things that the best assistants tend to do, they make suggestions about the things they can take off your plate. They're like, here are some things, you said it took you a year to become productive. And, I think I was fortunate with my first EA that it was a lot faster because that person came to me and said, here's a list of things I can do for you. This is the information I need. This is the context and the training that you need to provide me so I can provide this effective service. And I wonder for folks, who are coming into this new world, having that level of proactiveness coming from these agents and saying, hey, let me tell you how I can help you and how you can help me help you, rather than, I think that there is sometimes that kind of blinking cursor anxiety where it's like, this thing could do anything, maybe. Where do I start? Like, what things can I delegate to it?
Right. I think if I just go back to where we started this conversation about why Grammarly and Coda came together, it was really Grammarly's core insight was I can do lots of things. I can read everything that you've written. I know everything about everything else that's been written. I know all the grammar, but I can reliably give you grammar suggestions. And Grammarly sort of found its way to get, hundreds of millions of people to trust it to do that job over and over and over again. And I do think this packaging of agents is tricky. How do you know to hire one in the first place? And then when you're getting started, how does it say, I can do this job for you? Trust me, give me this information and so on. So I agree. That's going to be a really important challenge in making what feels like building blocks turn into solutions.
So maybe just to sort of put a point on this analogy, and there's something that just sort of came together for me in my mind. I'd be interested in your feedback on it, which is one of the things that I think gives me anxiety. And, we talked about interviewing these different chatbots and then, refining the prompt and, giving them feedback and trying again, is it's quite time consuming, right? And as a founder or as any knowledge worker, you tend to find yourself short on time. And if we're going to use this hiring people analogy, every experienced founder will tell you, what is your most important job? It is bringing on the best people, and you have to make the time to hire effectively. So I guess this is a great segue to the next thing. And I know I'm mindful of time, but something I wanted to talk to you about, which is the evolution of the role of a founder in an AI first world. And I guess one of them is, well, suddenly you need to be interviewing your AI assistant tools. You need to be making time to actually figure out which are the best tools for you and how to use them effectively, because that sort of onboarding and interviewing actually takes time. What are your thoughts on that?
It does. I love the analogy. I think it's, I think the list of tasks we're doing in a company, and by the way, I should say, I'm an AI optimist. I think the ability to hire AI agents will create more opportunity for humans, not less. So I don't think of this as, I look around, here's 100 people working on this, 50 of them can be AI versus not. That's not how I really think about it. I look at it as like, these are the tasks we're doing that are low value tasks throughout our company that we could hire assistants to help everybody be more productive, and therefore they can accomplish their tasks faster. They can do it with more accuracy. They can do it with better results and so on. But I do think finding those is really important. And there's an enormous amount of what companies do that is complete busy work. I mean, I'll give you one example that I really like. So if you go look at the average company and you say every company has some status reporting framework. There's this famous movie Office Space where they talk about the TPS reports. And we joke about it, but every company has some way they say, hey, the CEO wants to see every week updates on these 10 to 100 projects. And somebody goes and there's a tree cascade of how those things get aggregated and pulled up and so on. I was talking to one of our Coda customers. They told me that they polled some of their product managers, and it was about 30% of their time was spent collecting what had already happened, turning it into all the different forums that had to be entered, and describing it to people and saying, this is what happened last week. So we built a feature we've been referring to internally as agentic columns. And it's a very simple idea. So imagine you have a table of projects and you say, I have a column. And what I want this column to do is for every project, I want you to go read what's happening in the ticketing system, go read what's happening in GitHub, go read what's happening in Slack, go read what's happening in email. And I want you to give me a 5-bullet summary of what's happening there, and replace that task that your product manager, who should be spending all their time defining the right product and making sure we're hearing customer feedback and so on, they don't need to do this anymore. And so we're going to go hire. And if I came along and I said, hey, for every product manager, I could give them a project assistant that can go and do the status reporting task, I think we can open up this much broader set of things that we can do. So I do think that, I don't know if it's specific to founders, but I think it's every leader in a company should be looking around at your team and saying, well, what are the things your team does that are low value, that are repetitive, where the reason they're doing it is because it's hard to get machines to work across systems, or hard to get machines to do things that deal with unstructured information and can be talked to conversation. All that's changed. We can do all those things. And we use that to up-level all the employees.
I agree with all of that. There's a lot of busy work that happens and a lot of kind of manual labor, especially at the early stages. And so I guess I've got a little thesis I'd love to run past you based on conversations I've had with early stage founders in terms of how their role is evolving. And it's about, I guess, the role of scrappiness. Like the traditional startup life cycle is early on, the founder has to kind of do everything themselves. They're really a doer, right? Of course, they have to have the vision and so on, but they are grinding and doing a lot of manual labor. And eventually, when they have access to more capital, whether they raise it or it's coming in through revenues, they can hire people to do the stuff, and they slowly evolve into being more of a decider, more of an executive, right? It's saying, okay, this is how we allocate capital. These are the things we do. These are the things we don't do, and so on. And I'm wondering if the accessibility of these AI assistants, these AI employees, as we're talking about, that means that transition can happen earlier. My thesis is it can, right? Because now you can be, an early stage founder with limited capital, and you can hire a whole bunch of agents to do a bunch of the stuff for you that you used to have to simply grind out yourself.
For sure. I mean, I think maybe to just give a little bit of a story, but the first company I started was in 2000. It was called Centrata. And in those days, the minimum viable size of a company at that time was probably 30 or 40 people. And a very meaningful part of your office space and budget was your server racks. So our office had probably 30% of the space in the middle of the room allocated to a bunch of racks of servers, a bunch of fans, like all of these things had to be done there. I had to hire a bunch of people to manage them and administer them. And so this is all cost that not only was actual cost, hard costs, but it was mental costs. It's like I had to know how to do all this stuff. I had to hire people that knew how to do all this stuff. And then the cloud happened and we saw this shrink dramatically. And all of a sudden, instead of 30 people, you could start with 5. And those 5 didn't really need to know anything about running it on the cloud. Most people have never seen a server rack. They don't need to. It's, to use the analogy, it's in the cloud. And I do think that what we're watching here, I think a lot of people draw the analogy that it's as important as the shift from cloud is the shift to AI. And I think it's analogous, that the skills I need are now very different. And it allows me to focus on people whose skills are much more attuned to the actual customer problem we're trying to solve, instead of all the sort of repetitive work that we used to look at. And so we don't set up servers anymore. And soon, not only do we not need to collect product status anymore, we can now write big chunks of code ourselves. We can go collect customer feedback directly. We can go and analyze it. And now it gives me a chance to build more with less. Now, all that said, I think there's no bound to human ingenuity. I don't actually think what we end up with is a lot of smaller companies. I do think we get first products faster. I think we're going to get that first result quicker. We're going to get faster iteration cycles. But I actually think we're going to get bigger and better companies, because I think there's no cap on human ingenuity. I think there's so many things we've been able to do. And same way as the cloud changed, it changed the mix of our companies. It changed the min viable company, but it greatly increased the number of companies out there, and generally increased the size of them as well. And so I think we're going to see the same thing happen again.
I agree. I don't think this will lead to ultimately smaller companies, but I think it will lead to smaller companies at the early stages, like you said.
Yeah.
And you touched on this. I'd love to just get, a little bit more context on this. You said that the types of skills required to be an effective founder at that early stage kind of changes. And, there's always a limiting factor, right? Like in any system, you've got a limiting factor, a bottleneck. And I wonder, does AI change what that limiting factor is for early stage startups? And in what way would you say?
I mean, it definitely does. And I think if I go back to that analogy, you no longer have to know how to run a server rack or hire someone who knows how to run a server rack. So what are the types of things that you do today that maybe you don't have to do as much of? I mean, I think that obviously we're seeing developers able to produce code at a very different level. It's my view that the best developers can use things like Copilot to supercharge themselves. I don't think we've replaced them. I just think we've created them significantly faster computers and better keyboards, and and we're seeing better results from that. I think we're going to see the same thing out of designers. We're going to see that instead of reviewing one design, we can review hundreds. We're going to see faster feedback loops, as we can go and actually look at them and simulate what our users are going to think of them. I think we're going to see faster customer collection. But I think all the core functions of what a business does are going to be the same. I mean, I don't think it's fundamentally when cloud didn't change, we all have, we just went from having to have our team have a whole team of ops people to being able to do it with 1 or 2 SREs. And I think that's the change. I think it's not that design is going to go away. It means that we're going to get high leverage out of our designers. They're going to be able to work a lot faster. That's how I think about, I don't think the tasks of building a company are really that different. You have to identify the right customers. You have to build the right product. You have to hire the right employees and agents. You have to raise capital. You have to make all of these things are the same. You're just able to do them with a little bit more leverage.
That's right. And I think, you mentioned that term human ingenuity before. I'd love to stick with that for a moment, because I think what you're effectively saying is the ingenuity is what matters the most, right? It becomes the limiting factor as more and more of the execution can be taken by these tools. It is your ability to execute and orchestrate that vision and, bring that special human spark to it that's going to be the thing that matters the most.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's an exciting, maybe to go back to the YouTube world for a minute. You probably remember the story from our YouTube days, but I was really inspired by what YouTube did to people like Sal Khan. Like Sal Khan was this amazing, he runs Khan Academy. He was working in a hedge fund, but he happened to be a really good teacher, and he started Khan Academy, and it did really well. And I always used to joke that imagine if in order to build Khan Academy, he had to become a cable show producer. Like imagine he would have had to move to LA, he would have had to hire buy millions of dollars of equipment, hire all these people, and so on. Instead, he could start with a webcam. He actually recorded in his closet. And all of a sudden, he's a show more popular than almost any education show on the planet. And I think we decrease the distance between the person with the insight and the work product. I think YouTube did one class of that. I think cloud computing did a class of that. And I think AI is doing another class of that. It's going to decrease the distance between that ingenuity and the impact.
Shishir Mehrotra, thanks so much for coming on the Startup Podcast. I think that's a perfect place to finish it, with the limitless possibilities of human ingenuity that are being given extra leverage by this new tool set. I've been following your journey closely for years, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you and Coda and Grammarly together are going to do next. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Great seeing you.
Great seeing you too. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.